The first time Emma Turner noticed him watching was on a quiet Thursday evening. The sun had already slipped behind the trees, and the faint orange glow of dusk settled across her backyard. She stood by the sink rinsing dishes, half listening to the sound of the television in the living room where her husband, Daniel, was lost in another late-night work call. The house had grown too silent over the past few months, and she often filled that silence with small things, cleaning, rearranging, or just watching the sky fade into night. When she looked out the kitchen window, she saw him. Her neighbor, Mark Reynolds, standing by his own kitchen window across the fence, light spilling across his face. He wasn't staring in a strange or uncomfortable way. It was softer, more thoughtful, as if he didn't realize she could see him. Still, something about that look made her pause. For a moment, they locked eyes. Emma quickly glanced down, pretending to scrub a dish harder than necessary, her heart beating faster than she'd admit. Mark was quiet, always had been. He'd moved in 2 years ago after his divorce, a man of few words but kind gestures. He waved when they crossed paths and once helped her fix a broken garden light when Daniel wasn't home. Emma had thought nothing of it at the time, but lately, she found herself noticing more. The calm way he spoke, the steady confidence in his voice, and the faint sadness that seemed to linger behind his polite smiles. That night, Daniel didn't come to dinner until late. Emma had made salmon his favorite, but he barely looked up from his phone when he finally sat down. "Sorry, it's been crazy at work," he said, scrolling through an email. She forced a small smile. "I know." The conversation ended there. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have. Later, when she walked back into the kitchen to clean up, she glanced out the window again. Mark's lights were still on. He stood there, sketchbook in hand, focused, unaware or maybe fully aware of her watching back. That night, as she lay beside her husband, who had already fallen asleep, her mind replayed that single look through the window. It wasn't attraction exactly, it was curiosity. It's kind of warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, she tried to shake it off. She went about her chores, watered the plants, checked her email. Around noon, she stepped outside to bring in the mail and saw Mark by his fence, adjusting a loose plank. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, Emma," he called, his voice calm and low. "Morning," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've got the nicest garden on this street," he said. Nodding toward the flowers near her porch, she laughed lightly. "Oh, it's nothing special. Just something to keep me busy." Mark leaned against the fence. "Busy is good. Better than thinking too much?" She tilted her head. "Thinking too much about what?" He smiled faintly. "Life, regrets. Things we should have said but didn't." The words lingered between them. For a brief second, Emma forgot how to respond. Then Daniel's car horn echoed faintly from down the street. He was heading out early. Emma waved goodbye to Mark and hurried inside, her thoughts tangled. For the rest of the week, she noticed small things. Mark's light always came on at the same hour as hers. Sometimes she'd catch a shadow move across his window. Sometimes he'd wave when she stepped outside with her coffee. It became a quiet, unspoken rhythm between them, a pattern she didn't fully understand but didn't want to break either. By Friday evening, the loneliness in her home felt heavier. Daniel had gone out of town for a work conference, leaving behind a note on the fridge and a text that read, "Don't wait up. Love you." It was short, practical, emotionless. That night, the rain began. A soft drizzle at first, then a full storm that shook the windows. The power flickered twice and finally went out completely. Emma lit a few candles, the room bathed in a warm glow. She tried reading but couldn't focus. The thunder outside grew louder. A knock echoed on the door. When she opened it, Mark stood there, his jacket damp from the rain, holding a flashlight. "Hey," he said, smiling softly. "You okay? Your house looks dark." She exhaled in relief. "Yeah, just lost power. Happens every storm," he nodded. "I've got my generator running if you need some lighter coffee." Emma hesitated. It wasn't wrong to accept. It was just a neighbor being kind. But as she looked at him, standing there with rain dripping from his hair and that calm, gentle expression, she felt something stir in her chest, I'll just grab my coat, she said finally. Mark's home felt warm, welcoming, and faintly scented with cedar. The lights flickered softly from the generator's power. He poured her a cup of coffee and handed it over. It's instant. Nothing fancy, he said. It's perfect, she replied. Grateful for the comfort, they sat at his kitchen table listening to the rain. At first, the conversation was light, about the neighborhood, the weather, small talk. But soon it deepened. Mark told her about his work as an architect, how he missed designing homes that felt alive, homes that held love and laughter. Emma spoke about her old dreams: painting, teaching, art, things she had given up long ago. He listened, really listened, his eyes never wandering, his attention unwavering. She hadn't felt that in years. You know, Mark said quietly, people forget that homes are like hearts. If you stop caring for them, they fall apart. Emma looked at him, her pulse quickening. I think I stopped caring for mine a while ago, she whispered. He smiled sadly. Maybe you just forgot how. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of everything neither dared to say aloud. A loud crash of thunder startled her, and she instinctively touched his arm. His hand covered hers in reflex, warm and steady. For a second, time froze. Then she pulled back, her cheeks flushed. I should go, she said softly. He nodded, though his eyes lingered. Let me walk you home. The rain had eased into a drizzle as they crossed the yard. When they reached her porch, Emma turned to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Mark simply smiled and said, Good night, Emma. Good night, she replied, watching him walk away through the mist. When she stepped inside, Daniel had texted again. Hope the storm's not too bad. Big day tomorrow. No, I miss you. No warmth. Just another message from a man she'd barely recognized anymore. She sat by the window, sipping the last of the coffee Mark had made, and watched his house across the fence. His kitchen light was still on. She could see his silhouette moving slowly, closing the blinds. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Her thoughts ran wild, not with guilt, but with confusion. Why did she feel alive again? Why did a simple conversation feel like sunlight breaking through months of gray? By morning, the storm was gone. Daniel called briefly to say his meeting had gone well, but Emma barely heard him. Her eyes drifted toward the window once again. Mark's curtains were drawn, and she wondered if he was thinking about her too. She told herself it was innocent. Just two lonely souls sharing a cup of coffee during a storm. But deep down, something had shifted. From that night forward, she couldn't look at the kitchen window the same way again. The first time Emma Turner noticed him watching was on a quiet Thursday evening. The sun had already slipped behind the trees, and the faint orange glow of dusk settled across her backyard. She stood by the sink rinsing dishes, half listening to the sound of the television in the living room where her husband, Daniel, was lost in another late-night work call. The house had grown too silent over the past few months, and she often filled that silence with small things, cleaning, rearranging, or just watching the sky fade into night. When she looked out the kitchen window, she saw him. Her neighbor, Mark Reynolds, standing by his own kitchen window across the fence, light spilling across his face. He wasn't staring in a strange or uncomfortable way. It was softer, more thoughtful, as if he didn't realize she could see him. Still, something about that look made her pause. For a moment, they locked eyes. Emma quickly glanced down, pretending to scrub a dish harder than necessary, her heart beating faster than she'd admit. Mark was quiet, always had been. He'd moved in 2 years ago after his divorce, a man of few words but kind gestures. He waved when they crossed paths and once helped her fix a broken garden light when Daniel wasn't home. Emma had thought nothing of it at the time, but lately, she found herself noticing more. The calm way he spoke, the steady confidence in his voice, and the faint sadness that seemed to linger behind his polite smiles. That night, Daniel didn't come to dinner until late. Emma had made salmon his favorite, but he barely looked up from his phone when he finally sat down. Sorry, it's been crazy at work, he said, scrolling through an email. She forced a small smile. I know. The conversation ended there. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have. Later, When she walked back into the kitchen to clean up, she glanced out the window again. Mark's lights were still on. He stood there, sketchbook in hand, focused, unaware or maybe fully aware of her watching back. That night, as she lay beside her husband, who had already fallen asleep, her mind replayed that single look through the window. It wasn't attraction exactly, it was curiosity. It's kind of warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, she tried to shake it off. She went about her chores, watered the plants, checked her email. Around noon, she stepped outside to bring in the mail and saw Mark by his fence, adjusting a loose plank. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, Emma," he called, his voice calm and low. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Emma tried to focus on her daily routine, the morning coffee. For online art classes, the endless cycle of cleaning and small errands. But her mind often drifted to that stormy night and the calm tone of Mark's voice when he said, "Homes are like hearts." The phrase kept echoing in her thoughts like a melody she couldn't forget. Daniel returned home that Sunday. He was cheerful, talking about business dinners and new clients. He didn't notice that the fridge was still half empty, or that Emma's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. He kissed her on the cheek out of habit, not affection, and went straight to his study to check emails. The gap between them had grown so gradually that neither seemed to realize how far apart they now stood. That evening, while preparing dinner, Emma glanced out the kitchen window again. Mark's light was on. He stood there, fixing something on his countertop. He noticed her and smiled faintly, lifting a small wave before turning back to his work. She smiled back automatically, then caught herself and quickly turned away, pretending to check the oven. Her pulse quickened, not out of guilt, but from something she couldn't name. A strange, restless awareness. The next day, Mark came over to return a book she had lent him weeks ago, one she had forgotten about, The Art of Stillness. It was ironic, she thought. There was nothing still about her heart lately. "Thanks," she said. "'Kay." Opening the door, "I figured I should return it before I forget again," Mark said, smiling. He hesitated, glancing past her shoulder. "I was going to ask, I'm repainting the living room, and I could use another opinion. You've got an eye for colors, right?" Emma hesitated. She looked at her phone on the counter, Daniel's text flashing across the screen. "Late again tonight. Don't wait up." "Sure," she said finally. "Just for a few minutes." Mark's house smelled faintly of paint and coffee. The living room walls were half covered in soft shades of gray and ivory. She studied them thoughtfully, running her fingers along the smooth surface. "You've done a good job," she said. "It feels calm." "That's what I want," he replied quietly. "Peace." Emma looked at him. "You haven't had much of that, have you?" He smiled faintly. "Not for a long time." There was a pause. The hum of the refrigerator filled the air. Emma could feel his eyes on her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but as if he was trying to read something she wasn't saying. She turned back toward the wall, brushing away the silence. "Maybe add a little warmth, something soft like cream or taupe. It'll make the space feel alive." Mark nodded slowly. "I like that. Alive." He paused, his voice gentler. "You make things sound easy." Emma smiled. "I wish they were." He didn't respond, and the silence stretched, fragile but full. Then, suddenly, there was a knock at the door. A delivery man with a large box. Mark signed for it and laughed softly when he saw the label. "It's a new art print. I thought it might help fill the wall." Emma stepped closer as he unwrapped it. It was a large painting of a woman looking out of a window, her expression distant but full of quiet hope. The resemblance to Emma startled her. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Yeah," Mark murmured. "It reminded me of someone?" Her breath caught for a moment, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. Daniel's name lit up the screen. She looked at it, then silenced the call. "I should go," she said, her voice lower now. Mark didn't stop her. He only nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for the advice, Emma." She smiled faintly. "Any time." That night, Daniel came home late again. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie loose, and his voice carried that distracted tone she had grown to recognize. He barely looked at her when she asked about his day. "It's been nonstop," he said. "You wouldn't believe the mess at the office." "Daniel," she said softly, "we don't talk anymore." He looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "We're talking now." She wanted to argue, to tell him that this shallow exchange of words wasn't real conversation. But she was too tired. "Never mind," she said, clearing the plates as she washed the dishes. Her reflection in the window caught her eye. The kitchen window, the same one that connected her to Mark in quiet moments, now showed her face, weary, uncertain, searching for something more. The next afternoon, while walking back from the grocery store, Emma saw Mark fixing his garden fence again. He waved and walked toward her, taking one of the heavy bags from her hands. "Let me help you," he said. "You don't have to. I want to," he said simply. They carried the bags to her porch. When they reached the door, he hesitated, glancing toward the sky. "Looks like rain again," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Seems to follow us." For a few seconds, neither spoke. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees. The air between them felt charged, not with tension, but something deeper. Recognition. To lonely people who somehow understood each other without needing to explain why. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Mark hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Sure." Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon. She poured coffee and they sat by the kitchen table. It was the same table where Daniel once laughed and told stories back when things felt simple. Mark looked around. "You've got a beautiful home." "Thank you," she said, "though lately it doesn't feel like one." He looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "It's just quiet. Too quiet." He nodded, understanding instantly. Sometimes silence can be louder than words. She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "You really get that, don't you?" "I've lived it," he said quietly. The rain began again, tapping gently against the window. It was like déjà vu, the sound, the stillness. The way she felt seen for the first time in months. "I used to think I had everything figured out," she said. "But now, I don't even know what makes me happy anymore." Mark leaned forward slightly. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong places." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not passion, not temptation, just connection. Real, raw, and unexpected. The sound of the front door unlocking made them both freeze. Daniel's voice echoed from the hall. Emma, her heart raced. She hadn't expected him home early. Mark stood up immediately. "I should go." Emma nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you." "For the coffee." Mark gave a small nod and left through the side door just as Daniel entered the kitchen. Daniel looked at her, surprised. "Who was that?" "Mark," she said quickly. "He helped me carry groceries." Daniel frowned. "You spend a lot of time talking to that guy." Emma's chest tightened. "He's our neighbor." "That's all." Daniel didn't say anything else. He just sighed, grabbed a drink from the fridge, and walked out. The sound of the television filled the silence again, swallowing her thoughts. That night, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't guilty, but she was changed. Something had awakened in her, a realization that she wanted more than just a life of routines and polite conversations. She wanted warmth, understanding, connection, things that had quietly disappeared from her marriage. She thought of Mark's words. Earlier, "Maybe you're looking in the wrong places." She didn't know what that meant yet. But she knew this. Pretending to be fine was no longer enough. The next morning, she looked out her window again. Mark's curtains were closed. The absence of his light felt strangely heavy. She wondered if she had crossed an invisible line or if she was finally stepping out of one. Claire sat at her kitchen table long after the sunlight faded from the window, the cup of coffee in front of her long gone cold. The room was quiet, almost unbearably so, and yet her mind raced with all the moments from the last few weeks. She could still hear his voice in her head, the soft tone that had startled her so completely the first time he whispered her name. It was a sound that shouldn't have mattered to her. A sound from someone she knew she couldn't trust with her heart. And yet it lingered like a haunting melody she couldn't forget. She thought about the way he had looked at her, that mixture of hesitation and warmth, a combination that made it impossible to think clearly. Every glance felt loaded with meaning. And even though she tried to remind herself of the lines she shouldn't cross, her emotions had already begun to blur them. Claire had never believed she could feel such tension, such magnetic pull toward someone she hadn't anticipated, and it frightened her. The fear was mixed with something Elson's undeniable excitement that she had not felt in years. Not since her marriage had started to feel ordinary and predictable. The evening when they had spoken so openly in the park played over and over in her mind. He hadn't said anything inappropriate, nothing she could point to and label as wrong. But every word, every pause, every subtle smile had been heavy with meaning. She remembered the way his eyes searched hers, not with judgment, not with anger, but with an understanding that went deeper than words. It was in those moments that Claire realized she was experiencing something profound, something emotional that she could not ignore, no matter how hard she tried by the next day. The weight of her thoughts became almost unbearable. Claire kept herself busy at work, typing emails, attending meetings, and organizing files. Yet her mind wandered constantly back to him. Every little detail reminded her of his laugh when she had said something small and funny. The thoughtful gesture of offering her a coffee exactly how she liked it. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, just subtle, yet it left marks on her heart she couldn't erase. That evening she found herself walking alone through the quiet streets, retracing the path they had shared the previous weekend. The soft hum of the city, the faint glow of street lamps, and the cool breeze brushing her face mirrored her internal conflict. She had never expected that a simple human connection could feel so intense, so destabilizing. And yet she knew she had to face the truth of her feelings before they became something she could no longer manage. When she saw him that night, sitting on the familiar bench under the old oak tree, her heart skipped a beat. He looked up and smiled, the same gentle, understanding smile that had made her feel seen and heard. They talked about mundane things, first work, errands, the weather, but the pauses were charged. Filled with unspoken emotion, Claire realized that everything they were experiencing wasn't about physical attraction or reckless desire, was about companionship, empathy, and the understanding that two people could connect deeply even when the world expected them not to. Hours passed unnoticed as they spoke about their fears, their regrets, the small choices that had brought them to this point. Claire found herself laughing and sighing and reflecting in ways she hadn't allowed herself in years. There was honesty in the conversation, a clarity that forced her to see her own emotions without judgment. She understood that what she felt was complicated, that it couldn't be neatly categorized as right or wrong. Yet she also knew she had responsibilities that required careful thought and care. The night ended with them partying at the corner of the street. He had placed a hand lightly on hers, not in a way that demanded anything, not in a way that pressured, but in a way that acknowledged the bond they had formed. Claire had felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of hope and melancholy, and she realized that the experience had changed her forever. She wasn't naive. She understood that boundaries and choices mattered. And yet she could not deny the emotional truth of the moments they had shared. Over the next few days, Claire spent a lot of time reflecting alone. She wrote down her thoughts. She walked in the park. She took long drives through empty streets just to feel her own heartbeat and sort through the emotional labyrinth inside her. She realized that the connection she had felt was not something fleeting or superficial. It had depth, resonance, and a power to make her consider what she wanted out of life and love. And in that reflection, she also realized that her choices now would define not only her life, but the lives of those around her. Finally, she made a decision not about who she should or shouldn't be with, but about how she would honor her own emotions and act with integrity. She would carry the lessons from her time with him into her life, without letting them destroy the life she had already built. She would acknowledge the longing she had felt and the growth it inspired. And yet she would remain grounded, kind, and thoughtful interactions. The emotional intimacy they had shared would remain a part of her memory, a testament to the complexity of the human heart. In the end, Claire realized that the true lesson was not about infidelity or secrecy, but about honesty with herself. She learned that feelings are not always clear-cut, that attraction and admiration can exist even in complicated circumstances, and that it is possible to navigate them with care. She could remember the moments with him fondly and carry them as part of her story without allowing them to define her morality or her life. As the days turned into weeks, she noticed subtle changes in herself. She smiled more easily. She appreciated small gestures more, and she felt a sense of empathy she had almost forgotten. The bond she had formed with him had opened her heart in ways she hadn't expected, teaching her about connection, understanding, and the courage to face complicated feelings without shame. It was a quiet transformation, powerful yet gentle, and it gave her the confidence to face her future with clarity and compassion. And so, even though the story had begun with whispers and tension, it ended with reflection, growth, and understanding. Claire had faced the emotional storm, acknowledged her own desires, and chosen to act with thoughtfulness. But she carried experience with her not as a source of guilt, but as a reminder that the human heart is complicated, beautiful, and capable of great depth. The experience had tested her, had challenged her, and ultimately had made her stronger. She smiled one evening, sitting at her favorite window, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft colors. The memory of his voice, the quiet moments they shared, lingered in her mind like a gentle echo. She knew that life would continue, and with it, new experiences, challenges, and connections. But she also knew that she had met a part of herself she hadn't known existed. And that realization gave her a peace she hadn't expected. Claire's story, complicated and emotional as it was, became a part of her journey toward self-awareness. She learned that love, longing, and emotional bonds do not always fit neatly into life's boundaries, but they can teach lessons that remain with us forever. And as she looked at the fading light of day, she felt gratitude for the moments that had tested her heart, for the lessons that had shaped her mind, and for the quiet, enduring strength she had discovered within herself.